Hello and welcome to another video for WJEC Eduqas A-Level Religious Studies Judaism Theme 2. Today we're going to examine the theme of the Mitzvot. So what even are the Mitzvot? The Mitzvot, or the singular mitzvah, literally means commandments, and they refer to the laws relating to Jewish life that are found in the Torah, the Jewish Holy Scriptures. Jews believe that God has ordained certain mitzvot for them to follow, meaning they remain a key part of the Jewish faith, covering all areas of life. So this is a form, in a way, of divine command theory, right, that we've looked at in ethics, where God commands certain things. In total, the Torah details 613 mitzvot. There are 248 positive commands, so do this, do that, and 365 negative commands, or prohibitions, so you should not do this, you must not do that. And Maimonides' Mishnah Torah has actually got this list compiled. Okay, so it's found throughout the entire Torah, but Maimonides is the one who in the Mishnah Torah gets it in this list of 613 commands. However, there are a diversity of views amongst different Jewish sects regarding the relevance, role and purpose of the mitzvot nowadays, which we're going to look at now. So first of all, what do Orthodox Jews believe about the mitzvot? How do they view them? Orthodox Jews, then, are the traditional branch of Judaism that takes the Torah as the literal word of God. As a result, they believe that the Torah is perfect and the mitzvot contained within it came directly from God. Delange says that the rabbis all believed that every law originated with God at Sinai. Since Orthodox Jews claim that Moses was given all the commandments on Mount Sinai, which he then passed down to the chosen people. Okay, so this is literal divine command theory, the idea that God is actually giving the mitzvot and we actually have them from him, so they are of divine origin. Okay, this means that they see it as a duty, so it's a deontological system, to follow all the mitzvot to the best of their ability. Nonetheless, the mitzvot have developed throughout time, but their main purpose has been to discipline the Jewish people so that they can fulfill their part of the covenant with God. So, of course, God's role in the covenant is to protect and love and be with his people and give them, the land. But the Jews' part is to obey God by listening to his commands and, obeying exactly what he says you ought to do. Observing the mitzvot then distinguishes Jews from other people and allows them to practice their faith in God and his covenant. Therefore, Orthodox Jews believe it's their religious responsibility to keep the mitzvot, which is also a way of communicating with God. The mitzvot also cover a variety of issues, so not just religious issues, but also things like social dealings, business activities, and judicial procedures. Many mitzvot refer to ordinary activities we do every day, and so following them results in discipline and holiness. And so there's 613 of them, right? So they're going to cover a really wide range of different areas, and the ones that cover even just little things, you might think, well, what's the point in having those? Well, actually, they're done so that every single action, everything we do, everything we think, everything we say is sanctified and done according to the way God desires that we do it. And so therefore, our whole life, everything we do in the day for a Jew can be oriented towards God and his glory. However, over 200 of the mitzvot can no longer be obeyed, because they were instructions reserved for the rituals in the Jerusalem temple, which was destroyed in 70 AD. So because the temple is gone, all of those mitzvot, and about a third of them are actually to do with the temple, are no longer relevant. The rabbis have also continually debated the mitzvot and adapted them to fit the culture in which they lived. For example, many modern rabbis have tried to interpret the mitzvot in light of medical issues or modern ethical issues that didn't exist at the time. So things like IVF and organ donation, and to see, well, okay, there aren't specific mitzvot on these things, but how can we apply what we do have and what we do know and the mitzvot that do exist to these new issues? The mitzvot are comprised not only of ethical commandments like thou shalt not steal, but also many commands to do with rituals. So, for example, the fourth commandment, or some would say this is actually the third commandment, but one of the 10 commandments is keep the Sabbath day holy. Right, so you've got the ethical ones like do not murder, do not steal, do not lie, but then the ritual ones, because Judaism is full of rituals, there's a lot of different symbolic activities that they do and rituals, so again, some of the mitzvot concern those areas. There's another section of the commandments called the chukim, which means statutes. The chukim refer to the mitzvot they're given with no obvious reason. Okay, so therefore they serve as a test of faith and obedience. For example, the kashrut food laws are often seen as chukim. There's no reason per se. Some would argue that there is. Maybe it's a hygienic or a health reason that the Jews can't eat certain foods, like swine, for example. But some would say actually there's no obvious reason to keep them. We've just been told to do them, and so we're going to do them anyway. We're going to obey God, and those are known as the chukim, statutes. And then Jews also use the term halakha, which is the full term encompassing the entirety of Jewish law, in order to know what the mitzvot are, as well as to keep them relevant and alive in modern society. The halakha thus describes the whole body of rules and practices binding to Orthodox Jews. So that's all of the 630 mitzvot, and it's a way to regulate the mitzvot that is based on both the Torah, so the 630 mitzvot contained within it, and rabbinic tradition, the interpretations of the commands too, and maybe some additional commands too. Now, Brian Close argues that although many traditions are not explicit in the Torah, they provide a fence around the Torah, meaning they protect the mitzvot from being unintentionally broken, because there's so many of them that you never know a certain action you might do might break one of the sort of the minor ones. You don't know. So the traditions that are given by the rabbis and the explications that they give to elucidate further the mitzvot help safeguard them and ensure that everyone knows exactly what they are and what they're expected to do. Thus, Orthodox Jews find it extremely necessary to always live by the mitzvot, since they will be judged by God on their adherence to these commands and the covenant. Okay, they have a duty and responsibility to fulfill all of the mitzvot, or at least all that they are able to do. And so they take it very seriously. Okay, how about Reform Jews? What is their view on the mitzvot? In paragraphs 3 and 4 of the Pittsburgh Platform, the Reform Jewish position on the law and the mitzvot is set out. The Pittsburgh Platform says, we accept as binding, meaning obligatory and things we have to still keep to, only the moral laws. And they subsequently reject the civil and ritual laws of the Torah, which were designed for ancient Israelite society, but are no longer appropriate and may even, in the words of the Pittsburgh Platform, obstruct spiritual growth. So this is basically the concept of progressive revelation, which suggests that new spiritual and ethical ideals have been revealed in modern society. So when the 630 mitzvot were given to Moses, they're given in a certain context, they're given at a certain time. Okay, and so while maybe the moral laws are still applicable, or at least most or quite a few of them are, the things to do with rituals, for example, associated with the temple, and also the civil laws for the time, for the Israelites at that period, are no longer applicable. And now we have new ideals that have been revealed. And so, we need to look at the Torah, we need to look at what moral laws are there, because they, they're inspired by God, but not necessarily written by God. But again, these men are writing with inspiration from God. But not everything they write, not all the mitzvot is like to the letter they have to keep, like the Orthodox Jews believe. Let's look at a modern example. We've got civil divorce, right? The halakha forbids that. You cannot divorce, sort of legally. You can. There's a religious divorce that can be given involving a get, which is like the religious divorce document. But Reform Judaism actually permits civil divorce, even though the halakha forbids it. Reform Judaism also teaches that the Torah is the product, as we said, of inspired humans who had the law revealed to them, but this is not the direct word of God. Therefore, they say that the Torah contains many divine truths and is a useful guide, but is not the literal word of God. And so that's why they're not as strict about keeping all of the mitzvot. Since the Torah is man's interpretation of God's word, as we've seen, it's fallible, meaning it can make mistakes, or it's not, without any error. It can be wrong. Although they still hold it to a high regard, right? And therefore its mitzvot are not meant to be universal. They don't apply to everyone. Maybe at the time they would have been useful, but nowadays not all of them are. We have to reevaluate that, right? So we have to examine them in the situation we are in and adjust the mitzvot according to our own needs and the scenario that we find ourselves in. So throughout different societies and cultures, Reformed Jews follow different mitzvot to ensure that the religion develops and evolves rather than remaining static. So they view the mitzvot as a very helpful sort of outline, but they can sort of pick and choose as to which ones are relevant. Okay, and some are going to find it problematic because, how do you get to choose what laws of God you obey and what you don't obey? But Reformed Jews are going to say, well, they're not exactly all laws of God per se. They're human interpretations of what God has commanded. And we also are receiving new revelation that can tell us what ones we actually need to keep and what ones help us get closer to God and our personal relationship with him. That's why it's up to the individual to decide which mitzvot to follow, as it's their own personal relationship with God. For example, some Reform Jews will obey the kashrut food laws, while others see no use in them. So you might see some Reform Jews, still obeying to the fact that you cannot eat meat and dairy together, Whereas others are going to think, well, there's no really need to do that. It doesn't help me get closer to God, so I'm not going to obey that mitzvot. Okay, but they are going to obey other ones, like, not stealing and not lying, because those ones they think are still morally binding. So again, we have said, maybe you can sort of pick and choose, but it's not just as simple as that, where it's all sort of subjective. Reform Jews are still obliged to live ethical lives and obey God, but only by doing the mitzvot they feel will enable them to progress in their journey with God. So there's an element of conscience and being able to use the God-given reason and our ability to decipher between what we think is right and wrong in deciding what mitzvot we need to keep and what ones we can discard. And finally, let's look at Hasidic views on what they believe about the mitzvot. So Hasidic Judaism is an ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect originating from a spiritual revival by the mystic known as Baal Shem Tov. Like other Orthodox Jews, the Hasidim claim that God revealed the written and oral Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, containing all 613 mitzvot. It follows from this that they believe every single mitzvah to be important and universally binding on the Jewish people. So this again is consistent with the ordinary Orthodox Jewish belief. Therefore, strict obedience to the mitzvah is always expected as an act of religious devotion to follow God and fulfill their duties to him. Okay, so they take it very, very seriously. Unlike the Reform Jews, they have to keep every single one to the letter because they believe it is doing directly what God wills. Fulfilling the mitzvot brings Hasidic Jews much joy, as they have a clear direction in life, and they also have a sense of accomplished responsibility and can express their Jewish identity. And that is often shown by their really long beards and the earlocks, and they also have these massive hats as well that they wear. Hasidic Jews are very recognisable, and actually they aren't just doing that to make a fashion statement, they're actually doing it because they believe that is what God has commanded them to do, because it's a mitzvah. Okay, a mitzvah. As well as the mitzvot, though, there is a man known as the Rebbe. The Rebbe is a spiritual leader of Hasidic Jews who carries out a lot of authority and relevance within the Hasidism. He has a lot of status and power, possessing more spiritual knowledge and abilities than ordinary people. So he's sort of like an intermediate between ordinary Hasidic Jews and God. His most pertinent role is to teach the Torah and interpret the halakha, the body of Jewish law, with his decisions being absolute and incontrovertible. So they have the Torah, they have the mitzvot contained within there, but then also the Rebbe and what he says about the mitzvot and what they actually mean and how they're supposed to be lived. Those teachings are also binding too. Okay. Religious experience is emphasized more in Hasidism too, which resulted in the creation of a mystical tradition called Kabbalah, the teachings of which are believed to originate from Moses. The Kabbalah's main text is the Zohar, which gives us philosophical description of how God relates to the world, as well as other mystical insights into the Torah. The Zohar also states that each mitzvah reveals a truth about the upper world, meaning Jewish practices have cosmic implications, right? So how's that going to influence the mitzvah? Well, the mitzvah aren't just unimportant human acts. Actually, every act that we do, as we're made in God's image, his tselem, everything that we do when we listen to him, we obey him, that influences our soul, it gets us closer to him, and it also has an influence and reveals something from the upper world, from heaven, right? So the mitzvah are cosmically relevant, right? They have a role just beyond sort of mere human actions. Another obligation of the Hasidim is to continually practice something known as Eduqas. Okay, Eduqas is devotion to God, which involves always having God in one's mind, with every thought and action being an expression of one's connection to the Creator, right? And that can be done, of course, best of all with the mitzvah, because that's exactly what God has commanded the Jews to do. They also highlight God's omnipresence and the imperative to make all human activities holy, thereby allowing one to constantly worship God in one's daily life without ceasing. So again, we said earlier on that the mitzvot, because they're so vast, because they cover basically every area of life, they can ensure that every moment of our day, every single thing we do, think, say, and are, is directed towards God. It's oriented towards his kingdom and his glory and his majesty. And so this idea of dedicating and consecrating oneself totally to God is central within Hasidic Judaism, and the mitzvot is the perfect way to actually fulfill that purpose. Thus, Hasidic Jews place a lot of emphasis on the mitzvot to help achieve a pious character, so they get more holy, and to get closer to God. So they see the mitzvot as the best way to listen to God and to really draw into a closer relationship with him. Equally though, observance of the mitzvot enables the Hasidim to set an example to the rest of the world, to non-Jews, so that they can come to faith in the one true God. Okay, so that's another purpose of the mitzvot for Hasidic Jews. Now, what are some examples of the different views regarding the mitzvot? So we've seen the Reform, Orthodox, and Hasidic views, but what are some different views in practice? Well, most Orthodox Jews, as we've seen, follow the kashrut food laws, which are recorded in places like Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, meaning they can only eat kosher food like lamb and chicken, but no pork. However, lots of Reform Jews feel no need to follow these dietary restrictions as they don't enhance their spirituality, but some disagree and some will. Okay, so there's one example. Another example is Shabbat, right, the day of rest, which is Saturday for Jews, on which Orthodox Jews refrain from all types of work, even not turning on a light switch. They do not do any of the 39 what are called melachot, which are the forms of work forbidden on Shabbat. They take that very seriously, and Orthodox Jews will not do anything at all in terms of work on Shabbat. On the other hand, many Reform Jews are a lot more relaxed with working on the Sabbath, and they don't see much issue with driving to synagogue or turning on a light, as these rituals are not going to bring them closer to God. So we can see that Reform Jews have a very, very more relaxed and sort of pragmatic / practical interpretation of the mitzvot, whereas the Orthodox and the Hasidic Jews too are going to view them as like, no, obligatory, we have to keep them to the letter, and there's no budging, there are a rigid set of laws that we have to obey. Okay, so that is a brief overview of the mitzvot and how different Jews interpret the mitzvot, what the beliefs are, and some examples of difference of interpretation regarding both the kashrut and Shabbat as well. Thank you very much.